hope you're going to have a wonderful day with us. I'm co-chairing with Professor Allam Ahmed, who you know, we're both from Queen Mary, and also WASD. And today we'll be talking about the SDGs in universities with an overview. So I'm going to start quite quickly because Professor Bakri has been waiting for some time to come online. It's a huge pleasure to have Professor Bakri. I'm sure most of you know about him. He is the president of the Association of African Universities and has been doing a huge amount of work to continue to bring excellence to this initiative that was started more than 35 years ago. And we hope today to, at the end of the day, to have a model which is not only sustainable, implementable, with good governance and security around it, that all the African universities may be able to use and find it useful to be able to continue the focus for African universities. So I would not keep you any longer and let Prof. Bakri talk. I'm well aware there's more than 100 people online waiting to hear him. So good morning and thank you, Prof. Bakri.
In most African countries, higher education was started by the colonial powers, usually a single university established just for independence, and it established along the lines of traditional Western universities, was autonomous, self-regulatory, and usually run by scholars. That situation obviously changed over the years. We're not going into that, but I just want to say that at independence, people were hoping that higher education will help them bridging the gap with the developed world and undercoming their underdevelopment issues, which were and still those of lack of development of services and the rest of it. The Association of African Universities long ago in 1972 became aware of the need for making sure that higher education really serves the aspirations and ambitions of the African people. So in 1972, the association held a workshop in Accra in Ghana, which is still where our headquarters are. And in that meeting, the Accra conference stated that all universities in Africa must be between brackets, development universities. That is, development research should be a priority goal of African universities to inform national development policies and to orient academic disciplines, research, and community service towards developmental issues. Now, since national development is primarily the responsibility of governments, workshop participants agreed it was also the responsibility of governments to steer universities in the development direction. Now, adopting the model of the development university was a big deviation from the traditional model of the university, so it constitutes a huge challenge to African universities. So, although it actually gathers some support from many African academics and from the World Bank, there was a lot of resistance at universities. Now, also, there was the other issue about asking governments to actually play the role in steering universities in the right direction, because the original thinking was that governments should come to support involvement of universities in development issues and provide funding and all of that. But to be honest, the intervention of African governments in universities has not always been beneficial. And quite often it has been used to actually intervene in universities' autonomy and freedom and control universities, mostly for political purposes. And sometimes even use that to appoint their cronies into senior academic and administrative position, which created a lot of frustration, sometimes conflict within universities. In 2009, our association held another meeting in Abuja. It was a big conference, which again produced the Abuja Declaration of Sustainable Development in Africa and the role of higher education. So despite the enthusiasm for what we call the development university model, was lack of clarity and agreement about the role of higher education in development at both national and university levels. Now, with the advent of global economy, the African universities were faced with a new challenge because now they have to be able to produce a new type of human capital, people who help countries remaining competitive in the globalized economy. I will tell you a little bit about an important study which was carried by some South African researchers, was published in 2010. They looked at flagship universities from 8 African countries and 3 countries from the developed world. And they asked an important question: how equipped are African universities for new knowledge production? Answer was that in those universities studied, the research was not strong enough to enable them to make a sustainable, comprehensive contribution to development via new knowledge production. And you might agree or disagree, but I think it is a fact that the ability of African universities to generate new knowledge is relatively poor. Sustainable development and climate change interact on a number of levels. Climate policy response will affect the ability of countries to achieve sustainable development goals, while the pursuit of those goals will in turn affect the opportunities for and success of climate policy responses. The international community has committed to combat climate change and achieve 17 sustainable development. Climate change and sustainable development governance should be better connected to maximize the effectiveness of action in both domains. Although the need for integrating climate change into sustainable development was identified by many academics and researchers more than 2 decades ago, the progress in that respect has not been very satisfactory. I'll try to answer why was that. The issue has recently really been addressed vigorously in a number of documents, and I will quote only 3 important of these. One, produced by the World Meteorological Organization, entitled Climate Change Threatens Sustainable Development. It came out in September last year. And I will read an extract from that document. It says, monitoring the global climate indicators, as well as their related risks and impacts, is of critical importance for achieving sustainable development goals. The other document, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Report, published in 2022, again, quotation from there: the confluences of crises dominated by COVID-19, climate change, and conflicts are creating spin-off impacts on sustainable developments and peace and security. The third document, another important document published by the African Union, African Union Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy and Action Plan 2022-2032. And I will read this extract by His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of the Republic of Kenya, and the coordinator of the Committee of the African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change. The realization of Africa's Agenda 2063, which is the roadmap for development in Africa, cannot be possible without proactive collective continental efforts aimed at addressing the impacts and encumbrances of climate change, which hampers our integration and development. There is sufficient scientific evidence, corroborated by the voices from diverse strata of our own communities, that Africa is bearing the brunt of climate change impacts, despite contributing less than 4% of global greenhouse greenhouse gas emissions and negligible historical responsibility. Our economies greatly rely on climate-sensitive sectors, which have great similarities across the continent. The message is clear. Climate change is already significantly impacting Africa. We are the continent most vulnerable to climate change. So the problem, why did we have this problem with climate change research and really positioning it within the context of sustainable development? First, the degree of complexity and uncertainty, because these are very complex topics. It was an atmospheric phenomenon initially, which is now affecting our all walks of life. The other thing, it was difficult to predict and quantify the effects of climate change, especially long term. So it was difficult for universities to actually be able to communicate this message outside the walls of universities with a degree of certainty without really raising mistrust among the public about these issues. The second barrier to actually progress research in this area is the need for interdisciplinary approach. And we know that in our universities, this is not always easy because all the funding mechanisms, the public mechanisms are based on departments, which are based on disciplines. And for the individual researcher, it is more rewarding to concentrate on their narrow field and become experts in it rather than spending time and often trying to build teams. So unless universities change and now they have a system for rewarding the outcome of this multidisciplinary approach, then people, they think that their time and effort are better spent on their own disciplines. And the third is the need to share knowledge production and collaboration between disciplines, because climate historically was studied as the natural science, where development was a social science. And so to bring them together again and share knowledge and collaborate between people in these different disciplines was not easy. Otherwise, people will try to reinvent the wheel and start doing research on things in which they are not trained to do. The fourth one, and it is more important in Africa, is politics. Because as people become more aware of climate change and it becomes a political issue, then the governments will start paying attention to what is going on in universities and subject it to more examination and scrutiny. And they will be very sensitive about any messages communicating from universities to other societal organizations, and that might interfere with the ability of the university to contribute to this process. I will finish by just reading a number of recommendations about how can we help enabling our universities to play a larger role in this area. The first one, I think universities should try to build solidarity with all stakeholders, with political decision makers, with industry, with civil society organization. This should develop from collaboration into a real pact. The other thing is, number two, reevaluation of the social contract of universities and their role in society, and how can they search to identify the needs and aspirations of their societies. This will increase their ability to influence policy formulation and outputs. The third one is building sufficient expertise in the academic code. There is need for retraining of faculty for this purpose. Number four, governance. The way our universities are managed is not really conducive for them to play a very important role, and that has to be reviewed. The lack of internal democracy, conflict over other governance issues are really detrimental to these institutions. Five, they've got to be fostering an increased quality of teaching and learning in education for sustainable development through accreditation of courses and programs. Six, university leadership should adopt policies and implement strategic actions to address climate change, sustainable development. In addition to quality in education and research, policies should target gender equality, appropriate environmental management on campus, moving towards a carbon neutral university, cooperating with local communities to promote sustainable development goals, building a culture for responsible consumption and production. 7, increasing funding, and this is the big issue, which is not always easy because African governments have got a lot of competing interests. 8, adoption of outcome-based education. We should adopt an outcome-based education which is periodically assessed. 9, incorporate all aspects of climate change and sustainable development goals in the university curricula, which are regularly reviewed. 10, revision of the incentive system towards achievement of developmental role of the university and rewarding multidisciplinary research. 11, universities should strengthen their research capabilities and pay attention to their country's development. Africa needs a group of research-intensive or research-led universities. Now, the last point is I just want to, the development university is an entrepreneurial university, which incorporates entrepreneurship in the teaching curriculum and enable students to be job creators and not job seekers. Linkages with governments, industry, and other stakeholders and international agencies are important to help adopting an integrative approach to curriculum development and implementation to achieve these objectives. The last thing, I want to refer to the experiment of the African Excellence Centers, which are funded by the World Bank and some African governments in Central and West Africa, and run, coordinated by my organization, the Association of African Universities. I was on one of the World Bank evaluation panels, and it was a very good experiment, which we need to study further. It is in brief, the World Bank will fund a research project, which is selected on competitive basis in an African country in collaboration with a research center in a developed country. And there are guidelines that center has to work on this research issue, and then it has to train a number of PhDs from the region. It just tells us actually, if we have all the ingredients, we can have capable research centers which should contribute to the purpose of climate change and sustainable development. I finish by saying that the United Nations identified the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They address the global challenges we face, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. Universities are the primary institutions for dissemination of knowledge through teaching and for the generation of new knowledge through research. These aspects make universities essential players in achieving the objective of integrating climate change into sustainable development so that combating climate change policies can be pursued in a manner which is beneficial for social and economic development. Thank you for listening.
We really appreciate your time. Also, Professor Bakri visited Queen Mary twice, I think, if not 3 times. So he visited the university last time on the 17th of August, where we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Association of African Universities to start working, because we are prioritizing the universities in Africa. And we are very grateful. He also visited and met our vice principal for health. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time and hope to see you again in Queen Mary, Professor. Thank you very much.